Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. It is 1:30, and this is panel number 18042 titled Gaming in Immersive Spaces. My name is Chris Lassard, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm the CEO of Monkey Bubble, where we specialize in creating unforgettable gaming and entertainment events. I also work as a commentator for various gaming publishers like Blizzard Entertainment and Riot Games. And before diving into all of that esports stuff, I cut my teeth at a company here called Boulder Games, where we crafted our own independent games and immersive experiences for themed entertainment. Before we get started and introduce our wonderful panel here as well, I would like to read the land acknowledgement here. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty in their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. One other thing before we get fully started here is I'd like to mention is that we want to make sure that you know that you have a chance to ask questions as well. Here's how we'll handle the Q&A. We'll reserve the end of the discussion for that Q&A. We're using a note card system to receive questions from the audience. At any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers. Please write legibly. If you are a student, please note this is in your question on the card. When you finish, raise your hand to hand it to the producer, who will bring it up to me. I urge everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point. And now I'm going to do a brief introduction for each panelist. So next to me, I have Moses Ma. Moses Ma wears many hats: video game designer, artist, internet visionary, high-tech entrepreneur, filmmaker, physicist, and a martial artist. Credited for pioneering network games through Spectre VR, he now leads Future Lab. Their focus: AI, blockchain, enterprise computing, mobile apps, pandemic management, and tackling the societal impact of generative AI. Next to Moses, we have Billy Carney. Billy Carney is the chairman and co-founder of Roca News, a digital media company transforming news consumption for young audiences. Since its launch in 2020, Roca News has amassed 5 million followers and subscribers across social media, its app, and Roca newsletter. With $6 million in venture funding, it's one of the world's fastest growing news platforms. Carney previously worked as an investment banker at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch in New York City, and he graduated from the University of Notre Dame in 2018, and is also a recent addition to the Forbes 30 Under 30. And finally, we have Jake Sally, previously at Riot, this one with a Y, Verizon's content innovation arm. He spearheaded content development utilizing cutting-edge tech like VR, AR, AI, 5G, and motion capture. His work has graced prestigious platforms from the Super Bowl to Cannes, winning awards such as BAFTAs, Emmy, and a Peabody. A Princeton University alum, Sally is a force to the intersection of technology and entertainment. So, you know the who and the what's, let's talk about the why that we are here. So we're just going to start pretty simple and easy with what is the future of gaming? We're talking about immersive spaces in the title of this particular panel, but really we're talking about where gaming is going. So in your opinion and in your experience, we'll start with Jake. What is the future of gaming and immersive experiences for you?
Yeah, I think there's two different tracks when I think about it. What's keeping me up at night presently? On one track, I think gaming is going to start to get more personalized as we start to utilize AI to have conversations, to have quests, to have achievements and goals that are more and more and more specific to you based on the inputs that you provide it with. So that's kind of one big piece of it. And the other one I think is going to be the more immersive side of things. Personally, I've been working in VR and AR pretty exclusively for the last 10 years. I've produced about 40 XR projects. I think we're not quite there yet. I've used the Apple Vision Pro a lot right now. We got some room to go. But I do think for mobile, there's a lot of sensors on that device that billions of people have that are very, very, very underutilized. And I think we're starting to hit the inflection point where the processing power of those devices is really going to unlock kind of this next wave of gaming experiences that are contextual to your spaces rather than you kind of like imagining going to other spaces. I play a lot of games, love PlayStation, Xbox, we were just talking about the Steam Deck earlier. Those are all really enjoyable, but I think, and we'll get into this a little bit later, the ability for you to have experiences that matter in spaces that matter to you, your bedroom, your office, on your breaks, of course, and your friend spaces is going to really be kind of where this is all headed.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess what the future of gaming and kind of the immersion of it, what it means to me, is the blurring of the lines between real life and gaming. And I guess what I mean by that is on one side, gaming is going into reality, or rather, let's start with reality going into gaming. So you have like these things that you're buying, right, in Fortnite, whether it's a skin or in other games, these cosmetic enhancements that really provide no value, but people are willing to pay for. And kind of, I think, a cool example of this is in a game called RuneScape, which is an older game. It's like this online game where it's kind of a medieval setting. You can slay dragons and interact with other people, and there's a whole economy within the game. There's a part of the game that if you go to it, all the players there are speaking Spanish. And throughout the rest of this entire online game, everybody speaks English. The reason they speak Spanish there is because a few years ago, a few people from Venezuela going through an economic crisis realized that the RuneScape economy was more stable than their own countries. And so this group of people, they essentially farm the resources within this game and turn around and sell it for real life profit. And that's become a living wage in Venezuela, probably more than that, which is pretty remarkable. On the other side of it, gaming coming into, real life, like you can look at Duolingo, and there are now more people learning language through Duolingo's gamified language learning platform than there are US high school students taking language classes. So pretty remarkable.
It's actually been a couple of lifetimes in internet dog years for me, but one of my first products was the first commercially successful internet game. It's called Spectre, and one of the things we learned was that it pays off to understand the neurophysiology of gaming. So I remember we moved into a new office, and I looked really hard for an office abandoned by an advertising company because I wanted to be able to do blink rate response tracking. So we had a one-way mirror, and we had these cameras with very big lenses that magnified and counted the number of blinks while they were playing. And the less you blink, the more engaged you are. To give you an idea of one of the other tests we did, often when I had a video game company, whenever I visited my mom, all of her friends' kids would come and beg me for a summer job, right? And I had this one line to make her friends like me. When you bring your mom straight A's, you can come work for me. So they actually started studying really hard to do that. And when they got it, I didn't have my lab. So I came up with this other way of measuring immersion, which is I let them get started with the game, then I put a bowl of ice cream next to them. If the ice cream melted, I would have a hit. So you have to do that kind of immersion level. So the thing I'm actually looking for in the future is, when quantum computing comes out and we have AI kind of expressed and these 3D worlds are automatically generated, I actually think that the equivalent of opium dens will open and digital opium will be served. And people will basically strap in and spend like 20 hours playing a game in a fully assisted way, right? So, all of your bodily functions taken care of. I think these will actually be assisted by microdoses of hallucinogens. And I predict that's going to happen because that's already happening now. People in the, not the dark web, but in the edge of gaming, they're experimenting now with various synthetic drugs with VR to see if it would enhance the experience. So that kind of stuff is very interesting to me as a cultural phenomenon. I think that when that happens, we have a hit that'll actually open a new level of gaming because some research will come out of it that'll teach us how to do highly immersive games. And that's actually a goal that we should all strive for.
Any responses to the digital opium dens?
Love it. And yeah, I'm really curious, in the age where we're kind of like already, Dune 2 came out, ain't no way there were, there are people that are going, smoking a joint, going into those experiences. Do you feel like there are primitive versions of this digital opium that exist today, or there's some threshold of immersion that's required for it to really hit?
Great question.
Yeah, I think ecstasy is already being used in community games so that they can actually feel a connection, a better sense of connection. But I think the thing that actually you want to do is trigger that hypnopompic state where you actually let go and the dreamlike state happens. And that will happen with some drug, and I'm sure a biohacker is going to figure that out. No, actually, the thing I'm afraid of the most is CRISPR home kits, right? Because they'll be able to start biohacking. And what we'll probably do is somebody's going to mix it with some fungus, and next thing you know, you have a zombie apocalypse. But I think that biohacking with games hacking will actually have an effect. And it's not a bad thing. You just have, it's going to happen. And when that happens, it's going to be a transition to a new kind of entertainment where you literally take a drug and you do this experience. And it's guided, but you're actually in an active dream state while you're doing it.
I have a question as well. I kind of would love to hear you elaborate a bit more about how you see these full body experiences taking place in practicality, because I guess the main thing that popped into my head is, from what I hear, if you take, say, psilocybin, for instance, it's hard to look at a screen. Like, there's a nausea effect, and it's like there's so much going on. I guess, like, how do you kind of see it taking place?
Yeah, I read a kind of hard-to-find blog post about a VR developer testing various drugs, and he said there were drugs that actually lent into that experience instead of fought against it. And I think the other issue is the lag time. The Vision Pro actually has a very short lag time. Do you know why Apple's so good at the use of mice and lag time? It's because Steve Jobs was a games designer, and Nolan Bushnell told him the time it takes for a finger response to get to the brain is like 40 milliseconds. So the transfer delay rate for a mouse has to be in the order of 40 to 50 milliseconds. He was the first one to encode that into the hardware, and that's why it worked. But I think those issues could be solved with lag time delay. Our first game, we actually did those killing games. When I had a video game come in, the reason I didn't want the game business anymore is the board demanded killing games. I never did games that killed, right? I did the first flight simulator that you could land on a carrier, and I only did it to get a ride on a backseat on a carrier. Right? And it worked. The captain of the Lexington called and said, "Hey, you want to get it right?" And we said, "We'll be there." So the top designer and I, we backseated and landed on the carrier right before a reporter died, and they stopped doing that. So we were just got in there. But I think it's difficult. So that's all I can say.
Awesome. I did not expect that to go that direction, let me tell you. But I'm glad that it did, because I think that what we're going to end up talking about, too, is the ethics of consumption just in general when it comes to gaming and immersive experiences, because I think a lot of people look at things like Ready Player One, for example, as a negative, right? That if we do feed into these things, that's going to be where we end up, where the environment and society will crumble, and the only working parts of it will be digital. So what would you say, Moses, like to someone who's concerned about that, based on where we're going right now and based on what we just talked about?
Yeah, I think where you do your machine learning is really important. If I took the Instagram and Facebook feeds, you're going to end up with an AI that's more interested in popularity. So we have a product now called that we're developing called AI Mastermind, where we use AI to teach AI. And what we did is we realized that you learn most effectively not because of a subject or content, but because the teacher cared about you. So we break it down so there's peer coaching that goes along with the content. And we're actually capturing what the peer coaches say in these little study groups after we do an AI class. And what we tell those co-facilitators is try to be loving and caring because our AIs are learning how you're doing that. The hardest machine learning stuff to get is, can I actually follow the Dalai Lama for a year and learn how they speak and then do machine learning off of that? And so we wanted people to teach with compassion and capture that and bring that into the AI. And that would be the most valuable, AI that I could think of because it captures the compassion necessary for education to be useful. And I think we could reuse that in other areas. What do you guys think of that? Is it too woo-woo for you?
I think you know a lot more about it than I do. Yeah, it's, frankly, people always talk about how we may end up there, but I think at the end of the day, like, humans, fingers crossed, don't intrinsically want to be, sitting for, like, their entire lives. In a Wall-E scenario, like, nobody looks at it and goes, wow,
Great movie.
I wish that was me.
Yeah.
And so I find it hard to believe we're going to get to that point. Also, the idea of, an iRobot scenario where AI rebels, seemingly there would have to be some nefarious intent behind the AI. And if it's being taught properly, it doesn't, to me, register as something that's going to be a true concern.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we're quite a ways out. I don't know, been in it for a decade, have seen, again, some really, really crazy leaps. When I was doing my first VR experiences, there was massive lag time. You were plugged in, there were like 7 different cables that were going on, and now we're kind of at the point where you're like, for $1,000, you can have infinite virtual worlds in your backpack. Like, we are moving at a pace that's interesting, but I do think in terms of having large-scale networked experiences with no lag time, 4K per eye, which is kind of now the threshold that we need to be at for people to be like, I want to spend my time doing that versus looking at my phone. It's a really, really, really big leap to get there. Now that said, I love gaming. I'll game for 10 hours a day, like totally comfortably. But I think some of these things also can ideally be inspiring for people to want to go outside. Like, we're at the base of the Flatirons. It's mythic outside, And I think if you have that as like a immersive wallpaper, like, you're gonna hit an inflection point where you're kind of curious, like, where is this exactly? So I think it's something people are always doomsaying about. It's always kind of further out than people think it is, and the threshold to get there is quite high. But I do think that, the responsibility of content creators is to make things that are, really stoke your inner flame. Like, you as a person are excited about that. I've played games that have made me cry. Like, those games exist now. I think the vernacular of the medium of gaming has kind of crossed a threshold where you can actually evoke the same emotion that you evoke with a book or a movie. So that's, I think, where it gets exciting. Now, can everyone do that all simultaneously? I don't think we're there yet.
Human emotion through technology facilitation is a term that I've heard before.
And it's not, I think the empathy machine has been kind of played out at this point. Again, like, the people who came up with that, it's great. It's like a good, interesting starting point. There's some really, really interesting museum experiences where it's like, you and myself and like a woman would like switch bodies. Like, there are crazy experiences where you take on the role of like a custom security officer. Like, there's all sorts of crazy, crazy, crazy pieces like that. But it's hard to do that as like a fun consumer experience. Like, you can't spend, you're not gonna like wrap up work, have a beer, and like cry your eyes out for 6 hours. Like, that's hard.
I don't know why I'm going to say this. It just came to me. But George Lucas once said, My entire life could be explained in one story, that when I made THX 1138, I made it with my head. When I made Happy Days, I made it with my heart. But when I made Star Wars, I made it with my hands, and I was a child. So he actually went from adult to teenage to child, right, for his arc. I realized that I'm the opposite direction. My first products were like for the kid. I made them with my hands, and they were games. My second products were these e-commerce systems. They were like based on finance and becoming in my 30s. I want to be serious. But what I want to do now is actually build stuff that changes the world, right? It actually has a social component and impact that makes the world a better place and can be a legacy. So the one thing that made me sell my video game company is my marketing person said, oh, we just got 10 million users. And then I multiplied in my head that the average playtime was $100. And I had just destroyed 1 billion productive hours, right? That was like lost. The people couldn't get that back. And I thought, wow, if they spent that time learning a new skill or like caring about their families, that would have been a better world. And I said, I can't make games anymore. So that's why I got out of the games business, because it was time to grow up. And I think that games have to do that. When you build games, it can't just be about having more users and making more money. They need a social component. And it's not about making a better world, it's about making better people.
All right, so we're talking about now like the individual and their interaction with, the medium of a gaming. And I think something that a lot of people don't understand is how much gamification there is outside of gaming. For example, that there are a lot of social media sites, news sites, which we'll talk about in just a second, that use gamification, which is adding gaming elements to your platform or whatever you're doing to kind of, get that part fed into your brain. And so at Roca News, Billy, you're doing some gamified experiences when it comes to consuming the news. So how does this affect the consumption of that news, and how do you make it an authentic experience so you're not just using gaming to get higher numbers, that it's actually adding to the experience on your platform?
Yeah, so my company's called Roca News, as mentioned, and we have an app, and it's a gamified news app. And the way it works is that you would come on, and there's kind of two aspects of gamification. One that's kind of meta, in that you read a story, you get experience points, which we'll talk about in a second. And you can also play actual games. For one of our games, you're shown a picture of a story that's going on somewhere in the world, and you have to guess where in the world that story takes place before you read it. So there's like the geography component, like the GeoGuessr aspect, and then also the news itself. In terms of the user interaction, how that is affected, one, we do try to be a bit careful in how we build it around the actual reading of the news, so it's not over the top. The other part of it is that we want these things that occur to have these actions to be incentivized by a certain result. So if you're just getting experience points for reading a story, it's like, who gives a damn, like, okay, I leveled up to level 2, that means nothing to me. So we tried to build things within the experience that allow people to have that action and then go on to actually learn more within the app and interact with it more. One example of this is that as you level up through certain seasons we have within our app, so for a few months there's a theme. Right now it's World War I. We'll have another theme in a few months. You unlock exclusive content that we've made about World War I, and you read the entire history of the war in the app as you're reading the news itself. So it's kind of what's going on today, and also, how did we build this world that we've gotten to today? In addition to that, you can unlock avatars and certain things related to World War I and kind of deepen the experience for yourself. So for us, it's taking the news and also using incentives built into that to, teach people more. In this case, it's about World War I.
Cool. And then in terms of just more, the game side of things, Jake, so you're developing something right now with augmented reality. So you talked earlier about your varied experiences in entertainment, in TV and other, publishing aspects. And, VR and AR had a moment like 7 years ago, right, where everyone was on board and it kind of just disappeared. So why go back to AR? Why choose this medium now versus what it was, arguably a little bit more popular, 6 to 7 years ago?
Yeah, because I'm a sicko. No. All right. So immersive really is a gradient of reality when I think about it. On like the most immersive side, where the digital experience is completely obscuring the physical world, where you are completely immersed within the space, or a game, is kind of where we're kind of like leaning toward like the virtual reality side of things. And then there's kind of gradients into like mixed reality all the way through to augmented reality, which is projecting digital things into your physical space. That can be with a headset, that can be through your phone and using the camera on your phone to see those things. Pokemon Go, which is I think what we're talking about, which is still clearing like almost $1 billion a year, which is crazy. More than anything is a testament to Pokemon as a IP. Niantic, which is the company that makes that game, have not had another hit game, at least in the world of geolocation. And geolocation is a subset of augmented reality that is specifically, all augmented reality is inputs, outputs, right? So you take the input of where you are physically located, and you get the output of a gym where you can fight, or a certain Pokemon that might appear. What we find interesting at Jadu, which is the company we're building, we've got an app that's out. It's an augmented reality fighting game, so think Street Fighter, but in your real world, where your world is the arena. It's not a geolocation game. If you want to go play it at a pool, there's not going to be some crazy benefit to that. But what it is taking into account is the physical space that you're in. So it really is focusing on think horizontal planes. So like the physical ground is where your character is going to be. Vertical planes, so walls. We have moves where if you get kicked, you actually hit a physical wall. We can tell what that is. There's a couple other things we're playing around with. And so the reason I choose and go back to this after 10 years exploring really a lot of virtual reality experiences is because you get a really unique relationship with the player, which is their real world. We used to we made experiences kind of more recently, like a bedtime story AR experience that the phone can tell where your bed is in the space, and the experience won't start until it's like, I recognize that there is a bed in the space, and that's kind of like the play space that you're working within. If you go to sleep on your bed every single day, you have a very specific relationship with it. When you recontextualize that through a bedtime story AR experience, now when you look at your bed, it triggers that memory that's been formed. And so what we really think about is relationships. It's your relationship with a space, but through the technology of your phone. And that's really special, is kind of going from kind of like doom scrolling into actually using this as like a scope into your real world to see things and immerse yourself in new types of experiences is why I get up in the morning.
Awesome. So Moses, we're finally going to get to, I think, where a lot of people are interested in. We're going to start talking about AI right now. And so AI across the gambit of gaming has a pretty back and forth relationship with its consumers, and I think the people who create within the space as well. So Moses, recently, I was on your Twitter, and I saw that you wrote about something called the AI Hunger Games. For some context, there has been layoffs both in the gaming industry, the esports industry, and I believe also in the AI world as well. Can you walk us through what you meant by AI Hunger Games, and if you can, offer any solutions that could keep us away from this scenario again in the future?
Yeah. At the World Economic Forum, they released a report that predicted 85 million jobs would be lost to AI over the next 2 years. And that's actually 2 to 3 times the impact of COVID. The CEO of Coursera said that most people don't understand the impact of this. It's going to be a bloodbath. My prediction is that it could cause a black swan event, sort of like the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and people will be freaked out. And I believe that the easiest way to avoid this situation where everyone gets laid off or you're trying to fight getting laid off by using AI tools to prove you should be kept, that companies should just follow this one rule, which is train everyone first, then lay off, instead of the other way around. It would actually minimize the pain and suffering people have to deal with. So we have a product that we're working on now. It's called the AI Mastermind. You can actually find out about it at aimastermind.team. and it uses AI to teach AI, and we think it could reduce the cost of learning an AI skill 10x. Right now, it's a little bit less difficult than learning a new language or an instrument to master a skill, and anyone who's ever used Midjourney will tell you that. It takes a while, a few months of effort. And we think that this training system that we've developed could train AI in maybe, instead of $1,000 per person, somewhere between $10 and $100 per person. And we're testing it out like at a large bank shortly. If that does happen, we are talking to a number of interesting politicians. Like one is the Fiona Ma, who's the state treasurer of California. We're talking about maybe creating something where the state can rebate companies for learning to train their people to help avoid this collapse. We're actually talking to the senator of Colorado, Michael Bennet. He was very gracious, so we're just at beginning stages. And I think there's a way to do a public-private project where we can, if we open source the technology, we could reach 100 million people and train them in time. And we're calling this the Manhattan 2 project because it's even harder than building an atom bomb to get 100 million people to create a critical mass of coordinated human cognitive effort. If we could pull that off, I think we could solve things. This ability to work together to solve problems could unlock many other problems like climate change or ending pandemics, which is another project that we're working on. So that's sort of where we're coming from. But I did want to add one more thing about gamification. One of the first products I did after I left the game business was I built an innovation management project, and a large bank, bought it for a division. And then they said, we don't know which one's better, so we're going to buy 5 of them and let you compete. It's like a game, right? So I said, great. And they gave each of us a $5,000 budget, and we could pick a division. And everybody just did the same thing. They said, okay, we're going to buy $25, gift certificates to Starbucks and give them a coffee cup that says, I'm an innovator. So when it came to my team, they said, okay, we'll do what everyone else does. So I said, no, put it in a slot machine. Give a 30% chance of winning. Because intermittent behavioral reward modification is more effective than just giving a prize. If you turn it into a slot machine, they'll keep pulling, and we'll get more ideas out of people. And it worked. We actually produced 10 times more ideas than the other competitors because people were like going, they kept putting it, because they wanted that prize, right? They kept putting ideas in until they won one. So the ability to actually gamify successfully depends on whether you have a psychologist who's actually successfully done this before. So when a company comes to me and says, oh yeah, we gamify the interface. Gamify is sort of like a jargon word. And I go, yes, who did your gamification and what game awards did they win, right? If you haven't built an award-winning game, you probably are just using the words and using base level gamification rather than really tuning it to the psychology of your user and taking it to the next level. So I think those kinds of distinctions are really important to make sure that you succeed in the business world.
Mm-hmm. It has to be authentic, right?
Yeah.
It has to be an authentic experience. So I think we're gonna go back to, we had some audience questions come up that are really good, and that's just my reminder that if you do have a question, just raise your hand and our producer will come find you and bring that note card up here and we'll ask at the end. But yeah, let's actually just go back to Billy real quick, where what has been the most obvious benefit of the gamification for you? Does it help other aspects of the Roca network as well that aren't necessarily gamified? Does it increase people trying to get onto the website a little bit more? What is like the one thing that gamifying has really brought positively to your product?
Sure. I think it is kind of tough to extract like why gamification works here as opposed to some other thing that's going on in the background that we don't truly understand. I would say the biggest benefit, at least as we perceive it, and we talk to our audience and we watch them use our platform, is whether or not we can get them to buy into our quote-unquote game, which is read the stories, get the experience, compete against others, whatever have you. And if it does seem like a binary for us, in that, so another part of our kind of business model is that we believe in news, less is more. And obviously that's a field that people have a lot of strong opinions on. But I think one of the reasons news has become so problematic is because these companies try to fill this 24-hour news cycle, and there's just not that much going on. And when you have to make stuff up, you make bad things up. So we only deliver a handful of stories a day, 5 to 6 stories within our app. If a user comes onto our app and gets through every single story on the first day, say 5 out of 5, there's a 90% chance they come back the next day. And if they don't, that drops to like 20%. So for us, I think it's a great use. It's great if we can get them to buy and assign value to what we're trying to assign value to. If we can't, at least on the gamification or within the app, we kind of lose them.
All right, and then now let's talk about a little bit. We're actually going to go back to the opium dens real quick, because something that we've been talking about a lot in gamification, one of the aspects of it working is it kind of feeds into our need as humans for that slot machine almost, right? That like winning an award is a good thing, right? And so we keep interacting with it. And so I've noticed that a lot of things in gaming specifically are now speaking more towards those aspects of the human, psyche versus, authentic experience that makes us want to go back for any other reason. And since we did talk about things like, the opium dens before, how do we avoid those negative impacts? This is also an audience question that I'm kind of combining here. How do we avoid, people who are predisposed to these things, people who are addicts, people who might have, violent tendencies, when the media that we're right now kind of evangelizing in terms of total immersion, right, might affect in a negative way? Jake, because you have, AR and you're working with your, the real world around you, right? How do you kind of respond to something like that? Because I think it is something that we definitely need to answer to.
Yeah, I mean, the violence thing, I think, is just time and time again been proven to, not really be true. I grew up in the age where, parents were really freaking out about kids are playing violent video games. There's not a strong correlation. It just doesn't exist. Now, as games get more immersive, maybe that hijacks your lizard brain in some new way, and we should definitely keep awareness on that. But in terms of, the state of gaming today, pretty non-existent. I think, for augmented reality, Pokemon Go, you had people falling into potholes, walking off cliffs. So I think there's just a kind of base level of human selection that's going on at a certain point. This relationship, again, I play a lot of video games. I play, I'll play a 6-hour day, 10-hour day when the time is there. And I think it's okay for people to unwind. I think where it starts to trend into negative territory is for children, because if you're a baseline adult, no addictive personality, that kind of side of it, that's a whole separate thing we can touch on. But for kids, they don't know better, and they are hitting the button in a way that it might as well be. It could be sugar, it could be TikTok, it could be any of those things, and we see that kids are no surprise really bad at that, especially when there's a social component where it's all of your friends are doing that thing. It's really hard to mediate that. I think GDPR compliance is kind of a base level legal structure that a lot of games are, having to step in line with right now, that I think are really good. That goes all the way down to the terms of service being legible for a child to actually read. Will they actually read it? Up for debate, but at least it's there. China, surprisingly, has also had a lot of legislation limiting the number of hours that people are allowed to play, the amount they're allowed to spend. So it's a tricky one. I think it's falling predominantly on the role of parents, especially when it comes to children, to help mediate that. That is their responsibility. When it comes to the interaction with the real world, I think you do want to structure things in a way that people, especially for augmented reality, which is what I'll focus on for this, is, map-based augmented reality. Maps are crazy specific. I was walking around campus and it could tell the difference between this footpath and that footpath 5 feet apart from each other after I took 2 steps. So there's a level of specificity that game creators just need to take into account to kind of block off some of these pathways so that their game is not populating in places that really don't make sense. I think for us, we use third-person remote avatars. So when I'm in an experience, if it's me and Billy in a fight together, I'm seeing his avatar in my space, and my avatar is in his space. So there's a level of anonymity that's really nice, right? I can't see his physical space. Maybe his bedroom is a mess. I can't see any of that. All I see is the avatar. And I think that level of privacy is actually a really, really nice level in addition to it, where historically with augmented reality, it's a first-person medium, and you're seeing through the eyes of your character. But now it's becoming, at least from our perspective, a third-person medium where you can see, it's a standalone character in a space, and you guys can share an experience without having to necessarily share like the intimate spaces that you operate in.
Moses, I'm going to say the same thing for you, because I think the other thing, too, that kind of popped into my head is a lot of times when I hear people advocate for AI and, blockchain or other things like that, they try to absolve the technology from responsibility, right? That the people creating and working on the technology, it's the parents that need to do this, it's, the schools that need to do this correctly. Whose responsibility is it at the end of the day to make sure that these things lean more on the ethical side? Because I know that's a specific interest of yours as well.
Yeah, this has been an interesting panel because I haven't been in the game industry a lot for a while, and it's bringing up all these memories. So I right now remember one of the things that happened that made me decide to divest from the game business was I was somewhere public, and then some kid ran back to his mother and said, here's the thing I bought for you. And the mother said, where's the change? And then he looked up scared and said there was no change. And then she started screaming at him, you're going to be just like your father. You're an addict. You spent the money on video games, didn't you? And then he was like crying and saying, no, Mommy, I promise I didn't spend it on video games. And I was just thinking, oh my God, this kid's going to need therapy, right? But after seeing that, I took responsibility and got out of the games business because I knew I could make incredibly addictive games, and I wasn't going to make cigarettes anymore, right? I just said, I'm not going to make cigarettes. So I divested. I let the venture capitalists take over the company, and they did whatever they did. And I went into something that was more befitting, like someone who wants to build a positive society. So that's why I tell game developers, at some point you can say it's the parents' fault, but you have to take responsibility and realize that you might be creating tobacco, right? And I don't think there's any way around it. In terms of ethics with AI, it's the same thing. I think if you build AI that annoy people, kill people, or replace people, it's not as good as something that improves people or augments their skill base. So I think you need to create things that improve human beings rather than get them addicted. So anyway, that's just my position. I know the game developers will hate me for saying that, but it's the truth. It's at some point you have to say, am I making tobacco? And what am I going to do about it? And that's a big decision because you have a board that's telling you to make more money.
Yeah, I mean, I will wear the developer hat. I will be the contrarian. I will say, look, within reason, yes, but I think is it the role of developers to be responsible for humans doing unreasonable things with their product? No. If someone decides to buy a car and then drive it through a crowd of people, that's not Toyota's problem to be like, hey, we should have made a better car. We should have made a car that gives people improvements to their lives or upskills them. That's not the job of a car. The job of a game is to provide, honestly, fun. And then in order, you can come down to like a deep emotional experience. It can improve your life. It can make you rethink all these things, but games are games.
But what about a smart car that detects you're about to plow into 100 people and you're trying to kill them?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that car actually say, hey, I'm not going to do this?
We're not talking about a smart car. We're talking about a regular car. You can make a smart game or an educational game, for sure. But
No, I'm not saying an educational game. I'm saying all games should be somewhat smart. Like, for example, a time limiter on how long you can play.
that's called a parent. That's called a government. And those are the parties that are responsible for those things. That is their literal role in life. Like, you can't, it's not on the developer. If I'm just messing around and want to make Flappy Bird and someone decides to mainline that for 10 hours a day, those are bad parents. They are. Like, it's not the role of the developer to do that, or let the government step in and regulate and say, hey, developers, you have a moral or social or just general responsibility to put that limiter in place. And that's what governments do sometimes, but they don't do it here.
I think that game developers could actually do that ahead of time so that the government doesn't have to step in and regulate.
They could, but it's not their responsibility to do that. They
Is it?
could. No.
Is it?
Yes,
So
it is not.
then the question of ethics is, whose responsibility is it to build a better world?
Not the person
mine.
who's making Flappy Bird. That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to just make something that can be a momentary piece of fun. That is a better world for some people, and that's enough. You don't, as a developer, working with developers all day, you're like, there's 100 real practical problems of how to make an actual game, much less having to zoom out to the stratosphere of how is this game impacting society. No one is making games like that. Maybe a couple people, but I don't think it's few and far between.
Okay, I'll agree with you. For the Apple Vision, I think Apple is responsible for certain things with the headset. For example, you shouldn't be riding a bike with a headset.
And you are not, like, I have one. I use the Apple Vision Pro every single day. If you walk in the house faster than like, a casual stroll, it pops something up. But again, humans are stupid. And if a human wants to wear it skiing and they have whatever stupid thing happen to them, that's not even on Apple. I'm not even that big of an Apple fan.
I don't know. I think it is on Apple because they're going to get sued and they're smart enough to put a limiter in place to make sure, or at least
so what is it supposed to do? If someone is wearing it, they walk out of the house, they're wearing it in a normal environment, the environment they're supposed to be in, and they get up and sprint, how exactly is Apple supposed to prevent them from being an idiot?
I think that Apple could pop up something saying, I think you're riding a bike with a headset. This is not advisable.
It does that right now.
Right.
If you move too fast, it does that.
Yes, they should be doing that.
And they're doing it.
Yes.
So what's the problem?
No, I'm saying we're in a violent agreement.
Great.
Well, I think another aspect of this too is there's like an interesting middle ground because a lot of technology is developed and is not used for what it's developed for. For example, I have a personal experience with this. My old company did a government contract that was what I referred to initially for migration purposes after disasters. Of course, that turned into a way. It ended up turning into a violent type of thing where where the people could predict best places, to drop a bomb, for example, right? So I feel some personal responsibility for creating that opportunity to potentially do bad, even though it wasn't my intention. Just the fact that it's in the world and capable, I do take some responsibility for that. So what would you kind of respond to that? Because I think that's kind of like where Moses is at too, right?
You can, but it's opt-in versus opt-out.
Totally,
So
yeah.
I have a friend,
What's the nuance there, right?
Yeah, I have a friend who works at an autonomous drone company. You just extrapolate, and you're like, I remember when he had the first versions of it and we brought it like skiing and it would follow you through the trees and it was awesome. You got the best footage you could ever get. Of course there's a military application for it. There's a military application for this water bottle. So, but again, is it like I don't even know, is it the water bottle manufacturer's responsibility to be like, how do we not have people, like this could be a soft water bottle, but it doesn't make sense a lot of the time.
You're also referring, I think, to the slippery slope of like school shooters, for example, like in video games causing violence. And if we accept one thing, right, then a lot of other things are going to happen, right?
That's probably like the furthest edge. I don't know if I'm going to go down that rabbit hole, but I think there are outliers that are exceptions to the rule.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's. And then Billy, you're part of like the whole news aspect of this, right? Do you see is this something that something I always think we're in this we're here, we have these conversations all the time, right? Like, is this something that is genuinely a concern based on like things that you've seen in like particular data and like concerning with gaming, with addiction, and like those kinds of things?
Yeah. So, in terms of I guess at the end of the day, the capitalistic kind of incentive is to make money, right? So I feel like if you're placing responsibility on a private company which operates within this system the government's created, their incentive is going to be to go all the way. There's not really an incentive built in to stop them from saying, okay, like let's build a game that people want to play 24 hours a day. And I do think I tend to agree that it falls on the parents, at least in the early years, of course, we can talk about later on separately, but it's not just video games, right? Like, kids are on TikTok for 12 hours a day, and then as soon as their parents take away their iPad at dinner, they start screaming. And if you're raising somebody like that, it's not going to be limited to games. It's going to be anytime they get something they don't want, they freak out. In terms of, I guess, AI coming into news specifically, there's the ESPN fiasco, probably a couple months ago at this point, where it turns out, a bunch of the articles on ESPN were written by AI and it wasn't marked, and the CEO ended up getting fired. People don't want, beyond the fact that they were lying, people don't want AI in news, or disseminating information. There was this app called Artifact, which went out of business a few months ago. It was in operation for less than a year. It was started by Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram. So, the guy knew what he was doing in terms of apps, at least he did once. And it was a news feed that was aggregated by an AI. And this was supposed to be the cutting edge, like, we're going to find you the articles that you want to see, and we'll put them there for you. And it just didn't do anything for people. So, I guess you can also ask, like, is that because it wasn't good enough, or did people just not want AI disseminating information? And yeah, I just talked about a few things, but it's, at least in the news business itself, AI maybe can help with processes, but I don't think we're at the point where people want a robot reading them, current events.
Cool. And then Moses, any final wrap-ups here for your side of the, you've compared gaming with cigarettes at this, and a lot of addictive properties at this point, and you specifically said that you came out of it. Are you optimistic at all about any of the gaming aspects for the future?
Yeah, actually, I love games a little too much, and like I've always said, if you want to get over a video game addiction, start a video game company.
That's really, really good advice.
Yeah. So, no, I think it's a beautiful thing to create entertainment and to relieve stress in people. I'm just, concerned that if you have a single focus of being successful, engagement is what brings success, and you could over-focus on too much engagement. Actually, in Japan, someone has actually died playing a video game.
A couple people in South Korea have died playing League of Legends, for example.
So there is an issue around this digital opium stuff, but I think that's the interesting. I want to see that happen simply because I think that'll make better product. But anyway.
Yeah, and then Jake, to kind of put a cherry on top of that as well. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I think we are in the golden age of gaming, not because there are massive companies making massive games. Like, Call of Duty numbers are tanking hard because
good.
people are like, we're over it. We don't need another Call of Duty. But we're in the golden age of gaming because a small developer, a solo developer, has the ability to distribute a game direct to consumer for 30% of the take rate, or just put it up on a website. They have the tools available through Unity, Unreal Engine. You can make a game that looks like a AAA game with a laptop right now. Like, there is no better time than now to be making games. And the people who are making the games with a laptop in their bedroom, some of them are doing it for financial gain. Most of them are because they have something they want to tell. They have some weird, crazy little story that they want people to experience, and that's really special. And it doesn't have to make $100 million, $200 million, $500 million to break even. It can make $100,000, and it's life-changing money. That is why we're in the golden age of it, and that's why I think, I have a lot of hope for games for that reason, because the gradient is expanding exponentially in terms of the types of games, the types of experience you can have while playing games. And of course, digital opium's over here. I play Overwatch 2 every damn day.
I'm sorry about that.
And that's a game that you're like, am I getting any, am I a better person when I play it? Not really, but am I staying close with, my closest high school friends still?
Yeah.
100%, and that's special. So if that means a little bit of digital opium, so be it.
All right, and then Billy, your last kind of question is the kind of the same thing. Like, what are you most optimistic about? I also stole this from a fan card as a fan question as well, so thank you so much. But what are you like most excited about when it comes to the future? We've been, I would say, leaning on the negative end here, talking about AI and stuff. So, what is something that you're excited to see?
Sure. So I think, we can, as was mentioned earlier, you can use gamification in games for good. And from our perspective as a company, that's using incentives that we learn about through seeing video games created to make people read the news or be more engaged. The news participation rate amongst Gen Z and millennials is extremely low. So if you can take a process that is boring, and it's also not, people have this pretend thing that the curiosity gene totally skipped over Gen Z and they're just, all they want is short form video, and that's just not true. I mean, people will sit down and watch 3-hour YouTube podcasts. You just have to make a better product, and if you can use gamification to make products that help society better, I think that's a net positive.
I would also say, just to get over that initial hump, like you were talking about, if you read the 5 articles, you're in. But to get, like for us, there's like the tutorial for augmented reality is like the drop-off rate before people have like really understood, like, whoa, my room is the space, my phone is the camera, I can move in space. The moment they understand that, people are back on a very consistent basis. But to get people over that hump, to get them to read 5 articles, to get them to play one augmented reality fighting game, I think that's where gamification can really just like tip you over the edge and maybe force you out of your initial comfort zone, which is good.
Yeah, what I'm going to add is the best advice I can give to a gaming company is if someone offers you a license to a character like the Smurfs, and the only thing you could think of is Smurficide, you've got a problem. You really have to like expand your horizons and think maybe there's something else I can do. I remember when I released my first, flight simulator game, a guy named Will came out with this really crazy game that was based on city management. It was called Sim City, and we released it at the same time. He made a lot of money, right? And my game is now forgotten pretty much. So I think it's possible to do very interesting games that are successful without pulling that switch saying, I'm just gonna get that primal instinct satisfied. Because it is very fun to kill things. So I'm just urging people to like expand your horizons a little bit.
Yeah, some of the best games that have come out recently are not violent.
Yes.
I mean, COVID was saved by Animal Crossing, right? So for a lot of people. So I think we're kind of expanding. There's another really cool game that only advances when you blink, for example, and just shows the story of your life. That was you guys?
Yeah, I produced that.
Okay. Oh, is that the BAFTA? And you're in
Yeah, that's the
so,
BAFTA.
Before Your Eyes, I think is what it's called.
Before Your Eyes, yeah, mind-blowing, made me cry. The 3 creators have been working on it. They started in college, and you all should too, anyone who's trying to make games. But yeah, that game is like one of the most special games I've ever seen.
Yeah,
we didn't even make games at that point.
There's a point where you're like playing piano, and based on where you look at on the piano, like a certain story comes out. Games like Journey, like single player experiences, too. So I think we're getting there. It's definitely a lot better than it was. But we only have about 10 minutes remaining, so we're going to get to some of these audience questions. I try to loop some of them into the regular questioning, so hopefully that was good for you guys. But here, I think let's talk to Moses here. Is there anything in the gaming space here that you can see affecting potentially policy in a positive way for countries or governments around the world, maybe helping with the environment, mental health? Is there anything that you can like point us to specifically that we can get excited about?
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to address is depolarization of the world. I think something like there was a game called, what's it called, Virus or Infection? It's Pandemic, right? So I think if you created games where you could win by killing the virus, it could teach you what strategies actually worked, might help people align on what the correct strategies are, instead of like violently disagreeing how to treat a pandemic. So I think that there are ways of using gaming. In fact, when we were working for UNICEF, we had bid that project to build a polio simulator for them to play, and to drive awareness about these things. So yeah, I think that you can definitely do games, but they're not going to make a lot of money.
Cool. I mean, this is a fun one. Anything else that kind of like pops into equation, like something that you saw that you were like, that's pretty cool. Your own game doesn't count.
Yeah, how do you gamify depolarization? Like in the news industry, right? How do you tell gamify truth, fact-checking?
Well, fact-checking, I guess, would be another issue, but I think in terms of depolarizing it, if you can use gamification to make nonpartisan news exciting and worth clicking on, I think that's a win. Because, I mean, these companies' business models for so long have kind of driven them apart. Like, news companies in the advertising business that just put banner ads up on their website live off how many people click on the page. So the more incendiary of a title you can write, the better. And if one company sees their competitors doing that and driving all this ad revenue, they're going to say, we need to do the same thing, and it just gets worse and worse. On the subscription front, you start to pander to that audience over time, the people that pay you for the news, and that's going to push you further to a side as well. So if you can monetize via gamification, which is what we're trying to do, and people paying to deepen the experience of a nonpartisan news experience, then you're winning.
I would also throw in as another experience, I think The Last of Us 2, in terms of polarizing, one of the best of all time. It's super violent, so that's the bad news, but it's all about opposing parties and can they find common ground.
The violence, I would say, makes sense in that game, though, if that makes sense. It's a little bit more intentional.
That's fair.
Yeah. Cool. So we're going to go back into a little bit of the negative side of things. So it is pretty well known that in esports and gaming, the community can sometimes not be that nice, especially to each other. And with video games, there is anonymity attached to it. So how do we even begin to solve that problem? Obviously, if you've played League of Legends or Overwatch in the last 24 hours, you've experienced probably some type of harassment based on a variety of things that they're never going to learn about you, right? So that is definitely something that we all have to try to attack. But there's free speech, people out there. There are people who are using it for content itself. When a situation happens, because the gaming community does tend to like content like that. So how do we fight against that? We'll go just down the table here, starting with Jake.
Yeah, Overwatch is easily the most toxic community in all of gaming. So I'm on the front lines of that every single day. I think one thing that actually is super effective is reporting. Players have the option to report text harassment, video voice harassment, and basically people end up shouting into a vacuum where it's like they can still see all the conversations, hear all the conversations, but they can't respond or do anything, and that lasts for increasingly extended periods of time. And I think that I have a friend who's pretty toxic, and I've noticed as they've improved their reporting, it has gotten better. On the immersive side of things, there's, you are embodied in VR experiences, so you have a physical body, people are coming up doing like weird stuff. So that one's difficult too, but I think reporting, there's like a lot of good modern reporting systems, and I think AI is actually, that's one of the best use cases for it, is to actually just be able to review thousands, millions of hours of voice recordings and text recordings to determine if people should get a ban. Now, I think the question is like, who is programming those AIs to make those decisions? Is a really interesting one. We were dealing with this, thinking about it a little bit for our game, and there was kind of like a list of words that I was like, I feel like pretty much everyone in the world is on the same page. These are not words we should be saying in a fighting game that's for kids through adults. But it started to get complicated. I was like, oh, one of those words is like a totally normal name in certain countries. So, where do you go from there? So it's a tricky one. I think it's really, really difficult, but I do think the reporting structure, like community-based reporting, is strong. I think it works quite well, actually.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, coming out of those Call of Duty lobbies back in the day, it got pretty ugly. I guess what we try to do, at least, is elevate good behavior, and I think that's much more difficult in a situation where you're dealing with a fighting game or something kind of totally detached from the news. But so we have this discussion platform on our app, and people can vote for their favorite answers. And if you just kind of let that play out, it ends up being like the funny ones probably that get the most upvotes, or the hateful ones. But maybe my faith in humanity is just low. But we pick the answers ourselves. Like, people submit a few thousand, and we pick like the top 10, we call it, and people can go ahead and upvote on those. So it's kind of a mix of moderation from our end and letting the community decide. And we try not to go overboard. Like, if someone's saying some stuff that's weird, let it fly, as long as they're not, being hateful towards people or just mean.
Yeah, one area I thought would be interesting to study is there's a technique called nonviolent communication, NVC. I've always thought that would be a very interesting thing to encode into discussion forums, that it can detect when people have very disparate sentiment analysis, and then it could engage and provide some of that technique to reunify the community. But it's a really tough problem.
Yeah, I know. I recently saw that Riot Games themselves are just talking about just how tough it is because of how like culturally based a lot of things are. That it's not consistent across multiple countries, and and just how difficult it would be to train something on something like that. And I would not love to be the person training that AI and being exposed to all of that stuff too, because that's something else that I think we all kind of really underestimate when it comes to moderation. Even from Twitch, or something really small, is just you're exposed to some pretty rough stuff. So it's important to kind of just know that going in. But on that note, we have just, I think, a couple minutes left, and I wanted to go down the line and just have you guys talk about what you're doing right now, and if you have anything that you're working on for us to check out, what it is. You're doing your own shout-outs for this, and I'm the esports guy. We got to do it this way. So yeah, Jake, why don't you start? Like, talk about the game you're working on right now, where we could potentially find that media kit, and what you're working on next.
Yeah, you can find the game at www.jadu.ar. Augmented reality fighting game for your phone. We actually have a really, really big Season 1 release coming up May 14th. All new characters from all around the world. Cinematic single-player mode, and a bunch of other updates. So yeah, it's actually a really good time, I think, to be getting on the train.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, we have the app. We're across a few platforms, but the easiest would probably be to go on Instagram and follow us at Ride the News, like Ride the Wave, but Ride the News, where we do like very quick kind of daily news snippets. If you want to be informed, it's pretty straightforward.
Sure. If you'd like to have some fun learning AI skills, come and check us out at www.aimastermind.team. And if you're interested in this Manhattan 2 project, you can come to Manhattan2 2.team as well. And we'd love to talk to you about it and see where we can go.
Awesome, and I think I was able to touch on all of the audience questions. If not, I'm sorry, we are running out of time at this point. So thank you so much for your participation, and we really appreciate the knowledge that you guys shared. It was learning about a wide-ranging thing when it comes to gaming. I hope that you guys in the audience, or everyone in the audience, kind of understands that gaming isn't just the controller to the screen. It is everything that we just talked about. It is involved in a lot of our lives. Even if we know it or not, it's definitely a part of it. And I think being knowledgeable and aware of where these things are going is only going to be helpful for you as we go into the future. So thank you to our panelists once again. Thank you guys for listening. And that's going to be the end of our panel, which is gaming and immersive spaces in the future of gaming. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.